Hi everyone. So today I feel really privileged because I've got this lovely lady, Serena Kutchinsky, who's come especially down to Battle to the Fairy House to come and visit us to talk about her latest book, which has just been released, which is called Kutchinsky's Egg, and it's about the family, her father, Paul Kutchinsky, and the Kutchinsky family business, of course, a famous jewellery house, and the story of the egg, which is, I mean, I'm reading it and it is a page turner. It's such a good book. Welcome, Serena. Thank you so much for coming. And come on.
Thanks for having me, Victoria. It's a pleasure to be here. It's really strange having spent so long basically locked in my attic. I mean, I locked myself in to write the book in isolation, and then suddenly it being out in the world is both exhilarating and also quite terrifying at times.
I'm sure.
But so far, I've been really, really lucky, and it seems to have had a really good positive reception, and it's been attracting sort of audiences from the jewelry world like yourself and your audience, and that is so fantastic and means so much to me for the brand and the House of Kutchinsky to kind of be having a new life again.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is such a gripping story, and I'm sure, we were discussing before, I could see Netflix or someone like that wanting the story because, well, I mean, I'm really honoured because I feel like it's quite a heartwarming story, and parts of it, I mean, it must have been quite emotional journey for you, I'm sure.
It was. I mean, I think that's why, I sort of say that it took me a decade for various reasons.
Really? A decade?
Well, I first wrote an article about my dad and the egg in 2013.
Yeah.
And at that point, it was just a bit of like, what I wanted to know. I wasn't really interested in where the egg was at that point. I just kind of wanted to understand his motivations and why he did what he did. And I think that is where being a journalist kind of comes into play, because your job is always to kind of observe and try and understand people. And then obviously you apply that to your own family. So I wrote a piece for the Sunday Times, where I was working at the time, for Father's Day.
Wow, did you?
I was very lucky. I mean, it's it's in the book, but basically, as all these things do, it was chance, happenstance. I always used to prepare very well for our ideas meetings. Usually we had these scary ideas meetings. I was only in my sort of early 30s and I found them absolutely petrifying. You had to sit around a table with the editor at one end, and every member of the team had to put forward their best ideas. So the first few times I'd really studiously knocked up loads of ideas. Yeah. And for some reason that day I don't know, maybe I'd had a big weekend, I don't know. Can't remember, but I just didn't have anything. So I think I just blurted it out, because the egg story had become a kind of late night party piece that I would tell, when you're sort of sitting in the kitchen at a party and you want to entertain people. Yeah, it just become this kind of eccentric tale, because for years before that, we didn't really talk about it.
No.
In the sort of 2 decades that followed its creation, after it kind of, I always say the egg effectively ruined the 100-year-old business, destroyed my parents' marriage, and then really a decade after he made it, my father was dead, a broken man. So the egg for my family had become a sort of prism and symbol of sorrow and pain and grief.
So tainted.
Very much so. Pandora's
Serena.
egg.
Yeah. But you've now turned, can I say, something negative into something, really, really positive, because this is going to do so well. I mean, it really is, not just from the point of, our worlds have collided because of the jewellery connection. But really, fundamentally, this is just such a good story. Forget the jewellery link. It's just, everyone's got to buy it. It's so good. But can we have a little synopsis of it, like the beginning? Come on. So everybody, you've got to share this. It's so phenomenal.
Okay, fine. So actually, I was recently writing a piece about the writing process of the book, and I sort of joked about how at points I wished I hadn't decided to set it back in the 1890s and instead just started it in the 1980s, because obviously that would have been a lot simpler. But what I wanted to do was really understand the roots of my father's obsession with making the world's largest jewelled egg, where that came from, and as a historian, I studied history at university. And as a journalist, I kind of realized that to unpick that, I needed to go back in time and understand my heritage and the roots of our family, where we came from, the tradition into which he was born, and then within which Kutchinsky's egg was birthed, if you like. So the story starts...
because your roots, sorry to interrupt you, are Jewish, aren't they?
Yes.
Polish, Jewish, yeah.
So my ancestors, my great-great-grandparents came over in 1893, fleeing the pogroms, and they arrived in London with nothing, save for, so the story goes, my great-great-grandmother Leah was pretty canny, and she'd sewn some heirloom pieces into the skirts of her clothes, you know, to keep them safe. That was sort of standard practice when you were travelling at the time, so robbers wouldn't find them. I like to think she didn't tell her husband, because apparently he wasn't quite as smart and savvy as she was. So, you know, and we women always do these things, you know, we keep the ship on the water, or the train on the tracks. Exactly. So anyway, so they had enough money to get some lodgings and buy some tools. And Hirsch, my great-great-grandfather, he started out at the kitchen table repairing watches and battered silverware, mainly for fellow Jews who, you know, the silverware had been battered in the journey that they'd made. The hope was always that they would get to America. You know, that was the land of the free, the golden Medina. But either they were scammed or they ran out of money. But however it came about, they ended up in the East End of London.
Wow.
And what was super interesting is that when I started researching it, I had moved to East London, you know, a century later, not knowing that my ancestors had walked those streets, you know, and I found that it was quite emotional and quite humbling, because I realised, you know, here I am, you know, living a very comfortable middle-class life, you know, with all the comforts of 21st century Britain. And I owe that debt of gratitude to them, you know, because they came here with nothing and worked their way up. So I think, like, in terms of understanding your own identity and inheritance, I found that quite compelling. And anyway, so yes, they started the kitchen table, and then, you know, my great-great-grandfather, he passed away. His son, Moshe, opened a small shop in the East End. And then the small shop turned into a bigger shop as their family grew. Moshe was a very respected figure in the community, in the Jewish East End. He was very religious. They always say that he'd rather have been at home writing the Torah than, you know, selling anything for a living, or translating the Torah. Actually, the Torah was already written. So he was. But his position as a trusted figure in the community helped them build the brand. And his innovation was to allow people, brides-to-be, to take home a few engagement rings to try on at home. Try before you buy, basically.
So gaining people's trust.
Yes, exactly.
Very clever. Yes, very clever.
I mean, you know, I've never met the man, but from what I heard about him, I think it came from a real, you know, he genuinely felt that trust. Then along comes my grandfather, his youngest son, who is, you know, a bit more, had grown up in the East End. Moshe was born in Poland, but my grandfather Joe, like, he always said,
he's a bit of a character, Joe, isn't he?
He's a character. He's a wily businessman.
Wheeler dealer.
A wheeler dealer to his core. Also, you know, as it turns out, a bit of a creative genius as well. But yes, he always said of himself that he grew up amongst the market traders of the East End, and he never lost that mentality. You know, I mean, to say he bent the law, I think. But he was very ambitious. And so, whereas with his father was making this gesture about the engagement rings out of trust and a genuine, you know, faith in the community, my grandfather, he turned it into a marketing technique, and he realized, he saw an opportunity. None of their rivals were doing it. So, you know, you get to the start of World War II, and by that point, the Jewish East End are buying their engagement rings for Kutchinsky. And the amount of people still to this day who are like, my grandmother's engagement ring came from Kutchinsky, my mother's engagement ring came from Kutchinsky. It became the place for your engagement ring. Then obviously World War II hits, and people are not, you know, jewellery is not a priority at all. So Grandpa Joe has to find a new way to make some money. And this was one of the most interesting bits of my research, because there had always been this rumour that he'd gone to prison. And actually it was used to explain his kind of slightly hard demeanour. You know, he was quite I found him as a child quite intimidating.
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you know, I
yeah.
remember sort of prickly moustache and smells of tobacco. He would always give us sort of £2 wrapped in a hanky, trying to teach us the value of money.
I remember my great-grandfather smelling of old Holborn or something like
Yeah.
that. If ever I smell a tin, it takes me back. That's funny, isn't it, with smells?
He
Yeah.
was always you know, tobacco and whiskey, cigar in one hand, a glass of whiskey in another. That was
Yeah.
Grandpa Joe. But he basically, so he hit on a scheme with a fellow, you know, a sort of slightly older businessman in the East End, Uncle Edward, and they helped fellow Jews evade the draft for quite a hefty price tag,
Yes.
actually, about the equivalent of about 20 grand
Yeah,
a pop.
I read that and I was like, this is hot stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, researching that must have just been...
Well, it was amazing. I got the Home Office. So I'd heard, it was a rumour, you know, that no one ever spoke about. Mum said later when we talked about it, you know, you mentioned it on pain of death. But I pulled the Home Office papers and there it all was, you know. And what was amazing is there was one interview that had been conducted with my grandfather, and it was so fascinating. Like, you know, it was typed up verbatim. So hearing his voice, you know, in that moment. So he basically, they banged him up after 8 months, and he just married my grandma, like about 8 days before.
That's Lily.
Yes, Grandma Lily, the feisty matriarch. Very divisive figure she was. I mean, she was always wonderful to me, but when I spoke to people, they were, you know, they either loved her or they hated her.
Yeah, one of those. But
Yes.
a tough lady, I think she was.
Yes, and incredibly glamorous.
Yeah.
But you know, so my grandpa was in prison. At that point, he got moved around a bit. First went to Brixton, where Oswald Mosley was also there at the same time.
Yeah, I've read that in the book. Yeah.
You know, they were both branded traitors to the realm.
Yeah.
I mean, thankfully, my grandfather was not, you know, an anti-Semite, obviously, because he was Jewish. But there was a new it's quite complicated, but a new regulation had been passed at the start of the war when everyone was feeling very paranoid, and anyone who was sort of a traitor or a spy could get imprisoned without a trial. So my grandfather's war profiteering activities, effectively, because he was keeping people out of the army, were classified as a threat to national security. So he got imprisoned under the same regulation as Oswald Mosley. So that's why they were in Brixton Prison together.
So he must have felt very sort of, you know...
Well, the story always goes that he had dealings with Mosley. That my grandfather was, as I've said, a wily businessman.
Yeah.
He said we should all be Hungarian, which which is an old sort of Jewish saying, but according to the way it's been interpreted to me, means that Hungarian Jews were very, very adept at assimilation and were very respected and admired for the way they had assimilated in the Jewish community. So they kept their identity, but they sort of, you know, didn't get too involved in things. And they got involved, but not too much. And anyway, Grandpa always wanted to be a Hungarian about politics. He would get, you know, involved enough to benefit him. So Mosley was quite active in the East End. And initially, when the point after which he left the Labour Party, set up the new party before it became the British Union of the Fascist Party. There was a period within which he was courting quite a lot of rich Jewish businessmen to donate to his party. And I think that's how the connection must have been made. One of Mosley's biographers, I mean, it's a very controversial wording, which I don't agree with myself.
No.
But he says that Mosley's worldview effectively would have been there were good Jews and there were bad Jews.
Right.
And the good Jews, you know, I sort of cringe when I'm saying this, to be clear.
Yeah.
But, you know, this is what I was told by Stephen Dorrell, Mosley's biographer. And he says this is what this is the sort of accepted wisdom of Mosley, or at least one interpretation of that. So my grandfather would have fallen into good Jew because he was he was contributing to the economy and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I find all this like mind warping.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the story goes that at the start of World War II, we had family abroad, and Grandpa paid Mosley some money to use Mosley's contacts with the Nazis to help get family members brought back to Britain.
Wow.
You know,
and there's more. You've got one story about Kutchinsky egg,
I
but
know.
then this is a whole movie in itself, isn't it? Just that story about.
Well, it's so interesting because you're unpicking these things, and as a journalist, your responsibility is to like scrutinize. So you're like, okay, I've been told this as a rumour. It's a family story. For example, did my grandfather really do business with Oswald Mosley? I mean, really?
Yeah.
So then you have to do everything you can to evidence it. Obviously, I can't evidence it completely.
No.
But, what I can say is I spoke to lots of, several sources, all said the same thing independently of each other. I then found a precedent for it, that Mosley had done this for other Jewish families.
So it's sort of...
highly likely. And Mum said that Grandpa used to say that Mosley was one of the more rational fascist leaders in Europe at the time. Anyway, so yes, it was kind of, one of those. So it's a really interesting process when you've got your family history and then you're sort of putting it under the microscope, treating it like your work, really, trying to be professional. And I think sometimes that's quite a hard thing to translate to your family members as well, because, to them, it's just their life that they lived. And to me, suddenly it's, it's a story, and a story that I have to kind of pick apart and put back together with my own interpretation on it, I suppose. Yeah, so it was really interesting getting to know Grandpa Joe. I felt like I was getting to know him because, my memories of him are from childhood. And then when he passed away very soon after my father, everything in the family had got a bit bitter, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so after the war, all the money from the war profiteering, most of it goes back into the business. The House of Kutchinsky survives. The windows are a bit bombed. There's glass all over the streets of the East End, after the Blitz. But we survive. And at the start of the, just at the start of the 60s, Grandpa decides to move the business to the West End. And this was very controversial, Dad was always the black sheep of the family. He was adored by his mother. He was the youngest son, but he was always favoured. Everyone I spoke to was like, Lily favoured Paul, just like that. It was. She didn't hide it. He looked like her. So she invested all the hopes for the future of the family and the dynasty in my father. He was sent to a posh English boarding school. While his brother just went to a local Jewish school. They were treated, I felt sorry for my uncle when I was researching it. They were treated very differently.
But your father, I don't think, was very happy, was he, at the private school?
Not at all. So even though they registered him as Paul K, so to avoid kind of, the Jewishness, I suppose, the difference. No, he was the only Jewish boy in his year. He was bullied for not eating ham sandwiches. He was desperately unhappy and wanted to come home. And they did, I always thought actually, and I think he always thought he was just left there. But when I looked into it, I did find the school gave me a letter. So they had tried to get him in to a London day school, but I think his grades probably weren't up to it because he wasn't, he wasn't the most academic, my father. Very good at chess though, and he did get on the chess team.
Wow.
And do quite well. But I did find when I was sort of going through Mum's loft, I found all my dad's school reports and books, and he'd drawn kind of pictures of teenage angst, kind of swearing, like someone smoking a joint.
I saw that.
Yes.
That made me laugh.
Lists of girls' names with ticks by them. He did always like the ladies. And so I mean, again, it's such an interesting thing, I suppose I was trying to get to know my grandfather. I was definitely trying to get to know my father, because I didn't ever really get, he died when I was 20, so trying to kind of know him and understand him as an adult was something I never had the chance to do. And some people go to therapy. I decided to write a book.
Serena, that's really, I love that. I don't know which one's easier.
I don't know. And then so he knew that his life had been sort of mapped out for him, but he did push against it and tried to find his own identity, I think. So part of that was going to university, and after he didn't do very well in his A levels, the only option really was Aberdeen. Apparently the joke always went that he basically picked up the phone book, thumbed through it until he found the first university, called them, said, will you take me? And the first one was Aberdeen, and they said yes. He said fine. He didn't really have any, it was a science degree. I don't think he really wanted to study science, and he definitely didn't, I don't know if he'd ever been to Scotland before, but off he went. He wanted to get away.
The furthest point he could possibly get, almost, isn't it?
He wanted to work out, who he could be without the pressure of his mother's love, his father's shadow and success hanging over him, and this sense that, ineluctably he would end up going into the family business. He wanted to see if a different life might be possible. And so while he was there, he met my mother, Brenda Strachan, who was Scottish, from a working class background, didn't know anything about jewelry.
Jewelry, no.
Definitely not Jewish, but super bright and very beautiful. And yeah, I think, obviously I wasn't there, but I imagine that for my father, my mum was completely different, much more intellectual, and
a breath of fresh air. I feel like from reading your book, when you sort of built it up, because I think he was seeing somebody else for a bit, wasn't he?
He was.
Like his first girlfriend or something.
A lovely lady called Adele, who I have to say has been so supportive and helpful.
That's amazing.
I know, and I'm really touched by that, and I'm touched that my dad, even though they broke up when they were teenagers, that it meant enough to her that she was happy to share her story with me. And yeah, she's been really lovely. So he was with Adele, and I think Adele wasn't like traditional either.
Your mum didn't mind you talking with Adele then? It's like,
I don't think so. In fact, Adele's daughter was in my year at school, so our paths had crossed. They used to cross. I mean, it was a little bit
stars align.
It was a little bit awkward when we'd run into each other on skiing holidays.
Oh.
But so I'd always known that Adele was Daddy's ex-girlfriend, basically.
How funny.
And I don't think it was. I think it was the distance, really, and the fact that my father was trying to get away from like London and Jewish society. I mean, I've been in a long-distance relationship. It's hard to sustain.
Yeah.
Anyway, so him and my mum were kind of hanging out a bit, I suppose, if you like, and my mum couldn't quite understand what was going on, and she sort of talks about it like feeling quite confused. One moment he'd blow hot, the next he'd blow cold, but it was because he was holding back because he had a girlfriend at home. And then eventually things had kind of fizzled with Adele, and then him and mum, they hung out enough and then got together, and then they fell in love. I mean, my mother is not someone who, when she falls in love, it's a big thing. When she opens herself up emotionally, makes herself vulnerable. It's got to be for the real deal, really. And, she wasn't interested in his money, or like that didn't mean anything to her, but they just formed a really strong team, as you do when you're a marriage, I mean, they were different. Everyone always said that my mum kept him grounded. And then when my mum wasn't there anymore, he went into he went up into the stratosphere and then kind of spiraled. But anyway, so, then you have the kind of heyday of my parents in that they're married, 70s, 80s, the boom of the 80s, greed is good, the age of excess, the jewelry industry is booming, the Middle East royal families are all, newly oil rich, all coming over to London, buying jewelry, buying.
I mean, I read you've got Hollywood royalty. I mean, you had Diana Dawes, John Fumo, the Rolling Stones. It's
Robert Redford. Actually, I didn't put in.
Really,
it's a good story that my dad
was. Robert Redford.
I know. Well, my dad was trying to sell him a watch apparently, and Robert Redford was I mean, they were haggling over the price, and then my dad said, "You know what? If you give me that jumper, that you're wearing, Robert, you can have it at that price." And I still have that jumper. It's this lovely, colourful wool stripy jumper. It's amazing. So it's Robert Redford's jumper is in my cupboard at home.
My goodness! God, you could sell that on eBay for a small fortune, couldn't you?
Good story behind it.
Wow.
And then you have the sort of it was very. My father takes over. He's got loads of ideas, loads of ambition. Obviously, Grandpa Joe didn't really retire. I mean, he was always there, smoking his cigar, hovering over Dad's designs.
I can imagine that. I can picture that.
Absolutely. Going, make it bigger. Don't make it an apology. My dad wanted things to be dainty and elegant, a bit more, feminine, in the spirit of a bit more modern as he saw it. But his first few collections when he took over, they did all right, but they didn't set the world on fire. And at the same time, London was becoming the objet d'art capital of the world, and you had all these workshops springing up that specialised in enamelling, engraving, in basically making objet, which is very different to traditional jewellery. So I think my father saw the opportunity for more artistry, not that jewellery isn't artistry, but, more creativity in terms of taking a mundane object like a desk set or a clock and turning it into something, marvellous and wondrous. and also saw a financial opportunity because you could make much more, you could make hundreds of thousands
Yeah.
rather than tens of thousands
Yeah. Yeah.
with a one-off piece. But obviously, the cost of producing these things was quite high. But during the boom phase, I mean, they moved into Objet. Grandpa Joe wasn't particularly keen on it at first. There was a bit of a tussle. After the first few sales, secured loads of money, he let my dad get on with it. My dad really enjoyed designing these things, and working with designers and workshops. There were wonderful items, an golden enamel drum. There were sort of 3 tiers, mother of pearl skins, absolutely beautiful, painted red. There were bathroom scales apparently made for the Sultan of Brunei.
Really?
For his 5 bathrooms, and each one had different coloured stones in them to match the colour scheme of the different bathrooms. There were Simpsons figurines made for the children of Middle Eastern royalty, which were obviously a complete copyright knockoff. And my dad would have been in trouble, but luckily this was pre-social media, so there's no pictures.
Different times.
Exactly. Car phone, apparently a gold car phone.
No.
A blinged up Nintendo. All of these things were coming out of workshops. And we really, my father was really passionate about it. And I think this is where the sort of Fabergé obsession, he'd always loved Fabergé. And what Fabergé did, which was so, distinctive, was turn everyday objects into art. And I think my father thought, okay, if I'm going to really put us on and, make us up there with Bulgari and Boucheron, then I need a signature item. I need a one-off piece that's so spectacular the world's never seen its like anymore. And then he goes to a Fabergé exhibition in Munich in 1987 with my mum. It opened in 86, but they went in early 87. And it was the largest exhibition of Fabergé treasures that had emerged from behind the Iron Curtain by that point.
Wow, I'd have loved. Why don't they have something like that now? It'd be amazing.
I spoke to the curator of it, and he said, queues around the block, the eggs, and the imperial eggs were there.
Yeah, wow.
And they are. I don't know if you've seen them up close, Victoria, but they are like. There was an exhibition in London a few years ago, and I went on my own for research, and I'm not someone who kind of gets moved like willy-nilly, but I think having seen pictures of them for so long, actually seeing them up close and being able to kind of really be dazzled by them was amazing. And it did make me cry, actually. And also because I could see why they inspired my dad so much, particularly the lily of the valley egg. I love that.
Oh, wow. I mean, there is something spectacular about them, and there is nothing, they're standalone. You know something's Fabergé even before you just know there's just something special and unique about them, isn't there?
Absolutely. So this idea of being the modern Carl Fabergé, my dad first told my mum about it while they were in Munich on that trip. They were in a beer hall.
And what did she say?
I think she rolled her eyes and said, "Oh God, not another mad scheme, Paul."
Oh.
I think she was supportive. She was always supportive, but he did have a penchant for wild schemes. And, was a bit of a dreamer who had grown up in wealth. So unlike his father, didn't have the market trader mentality, much more, it's not that my dad, he was very generous. He was super generous and super warm and didn't really care about money, but kind of always expected it to be there.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So, once he took over, the wild schemes began. There was the Geneva shop, which only lasted 18 months. There was the polo team where we played again.
You had a polo team?
Sponsored a polo team, played against Prince Charles, as he was then, beat him, we'd like to say. Him and my dad had bonded over their love of Aston Martins.
Oh.
It was, all very glamorous. And, as a child, just kind of,
I was going to say, this is just unbelievable, the stuff that you've got. Do you tell your children? Or I suppose they're like, who's that, Mum?
We've got a polo shirt framed. I've got one framed.
Oh,
which
that's
is quite
so nice.
Like a relic, a Kutchinsky relic.
Yeah.
And my kids actually know all about the story now of Grandpa Paul and his golden egg. So that means quite a lot to me. But yeah, so the Geneva shop went the skids. There was a shipment of goods that were taken over by an agent, most of which was not declared. And the agent sort of stole it.
Really?
Yes, and then obviously my dad couldn't go to the police, could he? Because he hadn't
declared it, so it was like Oh, cloak
Yeah.
and dagger.
Yes, there was quite a lot of that going on, Victoria. I mean,
Wow.
there was a lot of not playing straight
Yeah.
by the book,
Yeah.
you know, and definitely by my grandfather and certainly by my father. In fact, when I started off looking into it, my mum was like, there are things about your father, you know, and I was like, well, I need to know them, you know,
Yeah.
I'd rather know
Yeah.
than have a wrong impression. And also, I think, you know, it is partly generational, I think. You know, a relative described my grandfather with affection to me as a swindler, a smuggler, a crook. You know, apparently he was part of a diamond cartel as well. And these diamonds would come in from Siberia to Docklands. Some of them would go to customs. Some of them would go over the side to a waiting boat and then be sold. You know, so I think, and particularly in the jewellery world, I think because it is so mysterious and secretive.
It is.
Discretion is everything. Yeah. You know, so I think quite a lot of this probably a lot of it did go on. You know, and we did, you know, pre-social media and not so much scrutiny. Anyway, Dad takes over, polo team, failed Geneva initiative. The foundations of the business are starting to look a little bit shaky. And then my great uncle Solly retired and he got a payout. And so that took a big lump out of the company.
Yeah, chunk out. So that was a bit of a hit. Your dad didn't need that, did he?
No. And then when Joe retired, he also wanted some capital as well. It was a different arrangement, but he also took some capital. So the business had kind of actually been squeezed to a point where when my father decided to make his egg.
So when did that decision? Take us back in time. What year was that?
So 87, he sat in the beer hall with my mum, telling her about his wild scheme, you know, possibly sketching it on a beer napkin. Mum is sort of saying, oh, goodness me, you know, okay, Paul. And then for a few years, you know, nothing happened. He'd get drunk and talk about being the next Carl Fabergé over dinner after too many glasses of red wine. But that would be it, really. And I think Mum probably crossed her fingers and hoped, you know, because at that point, still, despite the you know, things being a bit squeezed, they were still doing very well. They were, you know, she was on the committee of all these charities. They were getting fabulous press. You know, the brand was doing very, very well. And but my mum kind of knew that one more major misstep, one more failed wild endeavour, and they could be in serious trouble. And you know, they had 3 children by this point, etc., and the whole of the family to think about. So she was, as ever, trying to be the grounding influence. And then one day, by chance, sort of about 18 months maybe after they got back from Germany, it was Easter, and his designer Cheryl was sketching an egg. And she told me she was sort of sketching it in her free time, and she heard my father sort of padding up behind her in his Gucci loafers, and she was like, oh no, I'm going to get in trouble. And instead, apparently, he just leant over, grabbed the sketch and said, we'll make that, Cheryl. And off he went back to his office. And then it went back and forth between them several times until, in her words, it became a monster. And then Leo de Vroomen came along. De Vroomen, of course, got involved. Yeah. So my dad was looking for a goldsmith and a workshop to make it. Now, the Sanet and Stein workshop had been the Kutchinsky workshop since they moved from the East End for half a century. You know, he really should have gone to them first. And above all else, there was a massive, you know, decades worth of loyalty and trust there.
Yeah.
You know, Peter Stein, who's the son of Nat Stein, one of the co-founders, you know, still tells me that he's still hurt by it all these years later, still can't quite understand, you know, because as he said, they were goldsmiths. My dad wasn't, and you need to know the pond you're swimming in.
Yeah, you do.
Those were Peter's words.
That's clever, isn't it?
Yes.
I get that. Yeah, what territory you're in, you know, sort of.
Exactly. And so according to another goldsmith, Tony Bellingham, who also said he asked Dad for the chance to make it, Dad had put the sketch on the wall in his office, pinned it up there, and was showing it to different craftsmen and saying, what do you think? How much will it cost to make this? What materials do we need, etc. Anyway, he ends up choosing Leo de Vroomen. I always think that he saw de Vroomen as a sort of, you know, a fellow a fellow spirit, or he saw something of himself in him. I mean, I would say they ended up absolutely despising each other.
Really?
So they both
Yeah, of
would,
course, I suppose,
if
yeah.
either of them were alive, they'd probably dispute that. But
Yeah.
I think you are drawn to people where you see a reflection of yourself.
Yeah.
And De Vrooman was also, very mold breaking, ambitious, about the same age, doing things a bit differently in the trade. They definitely they were friendly at the start. They went for dinners, with their wives. And so it was
probably a collaboration together.
I think
he liked his idea and he thought, well, come on, let's do it together.
Yeah. So Dad commissioned De Vrooman Alexander, the manufacturing company, to do it. He chose De Vrooman. It was always a Kutchinsky project, but their workshop was building it. And then 10 months of 7,000 hours, a team of 6 core craftsmen in the workshop, but then they used maybe up to about 40 others because there were so many different ancient techniques needed to make this thing. And as they were going along, the design obviously grew and grew, but the thing that really elevated it was when Argyle Diamonds got involved. So the egg and the design, the project was in existence.
Yeah.
And then Argyle comes along probably towards like summer, early autumn of 1989. And that connection came about through friends of my father's, the Vayners, who were diamond dealers in Hatton Garden, and they worked with Argyle. And so Argyle became the world's biggest supplier of pink diamonds. But at the time, no one knew who they were. And Australia had never really had a supply of diamonds before, so no one even thought of Australia. Australia wasn't on the map in the diamond world.
Yeah.
And pink diamonds were very much out of fashion and considered to be sort of brown champagne at best. Obviously you'd get the occasional whopper from a South African mine, like the beautiful diamonds that are in the Queen sometimes wears.
Yeah.
But they were very inconsistent, no constant supply. So the Argyle mine became the world's first supply of these pink diamonds, but their pinks were much smaller than these big stones that had previously emerged, and sporadically. They were much smaller and they had a different hue. A bit of bubblegum, but some of them, the finest ones, had this kind of really rose violet hue that had never been seen before. I mean, I think they either made their own grading system or they had to change the colour grading system to accommodate it, because the world had never seen anything like it. So they were beautiful stones, and Argyle wanted a vehicle to show them off. So the Vayner brothers, who were the diamond dealers, thought they were doing, this was a match made in heaven.
Yeah.
Kutchinsky, famous jewellery company, they're working on this egg project. And Argyle want an heirloom item made, a hero project. Brilliant, bring them together. At this point, the egg project starts to kind of get bigger and bigger and bigger. 24,000 diamonds ended up in it.
Really?
Of which
That's incredible.
20,000 are pinks. So it's still the world's largest collection of pink diamonds. And now the Argyle mine is closed. So the scarcity and the value of those stones is almost unfathomable. Richard Vayner actually himself estimated the value of the egg to me at about 30 million.
I was going to ask you, because I haven't got to that in the book myself yet. So I was like, well, what's this thing worth?
Well, it was priced at 7 million in 1990, but estimated at 30 million now. Anyway, so
Crikey.
Dad's kind of fever dream, goes, carries on. I mean, as a child, all we sort of knew about it was he told me about it while we were sitting in a digger together one day on a Sunday. And
that's etched in your memory.
We were having a tennis court, which sounds like very, it's horribly posh. Sorry, we were having a tennis court built in our garden, and the workmen had abandoned this digger. And my dad was away a lot on business when I was a kid, so it was like I cherished time together. And this was like a rare father-daughter moment. And he lifted me up into the cab, and then he got up too. And we were laughing about how, the papers were going to report on a Kutchinsky and daughter rampage around the neighbourhood, if we took it for a spin. While we were sat there, he was like, I've got a secret to tell you,
Wow.
And I always wanted to be his confidant.
Yeah.
So I didn't really understand, he started telling me about Fabergé and the Romanoffs. And then, I understood it because my mum had these little porcelain replicas of Fabergé eggs on her dressing table, and I'd got in trouble rolling them down the corridor.
Oh.
So he said, you know
good
those
marbles.
Yes, exactly.
Fabergé eggs.
The story of Fabergé is it's so compelling as well, and it's so tragic. So I sort of nodded along, and then he started telling me that it would have, about pink diamonds, and I didn't like pink, so I didn't respond very well to that at that point in time. I was like, oh no, I don't like pink, Daddy. But he promised me it would be the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. So we knew the egg was happening, and then everything in life sort of felt like it was on hold, and everything was going to happen after the egg. Good things would happen after the egg. Fame, fortune, holidays, my mum would get a new car, and most importantly, we might get a puppy.
Oh, everything was hinging on the egg.
I was really holding out for that puppy, Victoria.
Quite psychological sort of, wasn't it? Sort of everything, like this is going to be the answer to all our prayers.
It was a Hail Mary. Aside from the family, it was the Hail Mary that would save the business.
Yeah.
In one fell blow would solve all the fears. But obviously, it had to sell. And it was really fascinating going back through, looking at all the old documents and seeing the list of potential buyers. And so top of the pops, effectively, was the Sultan of Brunei, who was one of Dad's major clients and had basically snapped up almost every objet d'art that he'd made.
The automatic customer to buy something like that.
Absolutely, yeah.
To have the biggest, most expensive egg.
Then it was Donald Trump was on the list.
Really?
Yeah. And then Malcolm Forbes, who'd sadly had a heart attack and passed away earlier that year.
Yeah.
So by the time they got around to trying to sell, he was no longer on the list, very sadly. So my dad wasn't worried. He was worried about making it and if he could pull it off. He wasn't worried about selling it because he'd never had any trouble. He used to say, I've got the Midas touch. He believed it. That would be the easy bit.
He sounded like the ultimate salesman, very good at what he did, and
very
very good at powers of persuasion.
Yes, and he would make friends with his clients. Which I always think is actually quite an interesting. I actually found that quite an interesting duality when I was thinking about his psychology, because it's like, I think that's maybe partly why he wanted to be the maestro in this. To make the egg, to have a masterpiece.
Yeah.
Because when you are associating with and shadowing the lives of the super wealthy, but you're always the one selling them something. So you're the maker, not the maestro.
Yeah,
and I think
that's a good analogy. I like that.
I think he craved that level of acceptance, and that part of what drove him. It goes back to being Jewish. He was always convinced that we were, we didn't get a royal warrant because we were Jewish, that we wouldn't get the high end of English society because we were Jewish, because we were different. Whereas my grandfather was a bit more relaxed about it and thought that, actually, because he was happy to haggle over prices and took a non-traditional approach, that was a bit of a calling card.
Yeah.
Partly why he said that the Middle Eastern families would come because, Joe Kutchinsky would haggle with them for several days, whereas more traditional jewelers might not indulge the practice. But yes, so, a combination of things, really. A desire to save the business, a desire to forge his own identity, to step out of his father's shadow once and for all went into the idea of Kutchinsky's egg. And, once it started, it just totally consumed him. And I think that is interesting, isn't it, when, we were talking about this earlier, when you have something and you invest so much in it.
Obsession. It becomes the be all and end all. And, almost the thing you've created, this wonderful thing, can be the thing that destroys you. And
absolutely, 100%. So, and my mother, obviously she supported him, but she was always wary of it. And my dad is quite complex and obviously flawed. And my sister's relationship with him obviously suffered when he left my mum. So what happened was, while he was making the egg, I think he was so caught up in it. And then, I don't know, I will never know exactly what was going on in their relationship.
No, because that's probably too...
Relationships are between two people.
Yeah.
But his version was always that he never meant to have an affair. It just sort of happened.
Yeah.
Which is believable. Things do just happen at times. Anyway, Anna was a beautiful, young 22-year-old. She worked for the Vayner brothers. And so whenever he was going to see the Vayners, he would see her. And they started going for drinks on a Friday with everyone as a group. And then they just started, they formed a friendship. And I think at this point, it coincided with the egg when it was made, and it was becoming apparent it wasn't selling. And so this was a very difficult, stressful period for my dad, you can imagine. And I think obviously that put a stress on.
The pressure of the money.
Yeah, exactly. The creditors' letters piling up, the bank starting to get impatient. It all rested on being able to sell the egg, whether or not for the 7 million that he'd, first put the price tag on. But so that, I'm sure that put a strain on things. And Anna was a young, friendly person who was outside of all of that he felt he could talk to. So he talked to her, and, at some point talking turned into something else.
Yeah.
I would also like to say that, Anna has shared her story with me as well, and filled in those gaps in that story about my dad, which I'm really grateful for. So basically they had an affair. My mum was obviously devastated, when she found out. My father left, and this is all happening. So he left the family home in September 1990. The business was finally sold in March 91. So this unraveling of everything was happening at the same time. In fact, as Anna said at one point, he said, it was almost like he went, everything's going tits up, so I'm just going to fuck it and blow up my life.
Wow.
I think she would probably say that his infatuation with her was very intense, but maybe born out of that period as well. And in my opinion, I look at it and I'm like, obviously she was really beautiful and talented, but would he have...
Part of the excitement of everything else that was going on that fueled it, was it?
Exactly. I mean, you could also just be cynical and say his ego got too big, and he was on TV and he thought he was a celebrity.
Because the TV, I mean, the very first chapter of the book, which actually is, I think, brilliant because it sort of draws you in, is, of course, being on the Wogan show, Terry Wogan.
Exactly, yeah. No, I remember watching it at home as a child. So basically, when the egg came out, I mean, it was so much fanfare. He'd completed it. My father was triumphant. It was all over the press. He went on Wogan. The egg went on a world tour. I mean, it was all amazing. And I remember it being so exciting and being so proud, slightly confused why anyone would want an egg so big that wasn't chocolate. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
But at the same, told all my friends that we've got the Guinness World Record. And actually, I remember when I first wrote an article about it in 2013, I pitched the idea, and then I was like, oh my God, what if someone else has got the world record in the intervening decades?
Yes.
I mean, why would anyone else make the world's largest boiled egg?
Yeah.
Particularly after what happened.
Yeah.
But I had to go and double check it. And I was so relieved and proud again when I was contacted the Guinness World Record press office, and they were like, no, your dad still got it. Apparently he used to carry around a copy of it in a sports bag.
Did
and when he got drunk, he'd get it out in the pub.
Oh my God, it was like his party piece, but it's like, I mean, he really was very proud of his achievement, wasn't he?
He was. And one of the things that gave me a lot of comfort, actually, was knowing that even though it never sold, and even though all the devastation it caused, and I'm sure, bringing down the business did weigh heavy on him, but in terms of the creative achievement, that's always the thing he was most proud of.
Yeah.
He was the man who'd made the golden egg.
Yeah. I mean, and the whole story from start to finish, how he created it and managed to pull it off and make it. I mean, it's like literally the deal of not being able to sell it. You'd think in today's market they'd have a queue of people wanting to, if he had made it in today's world.
Well,
it would be.
I actually also thought, the Russian oligarchs, if they had been a sort of class, if they'd existed in the same way they do now, I'm sure they would have snapped it up.
Yeah.
It was just very unlucky. I think, to be honest, some people have suggested that the Fabergé tradition didn't translate to the Middle East market. Probably some validity in that. Also, the fact that it got so much publicity meant that it was overexposed, and people didn't like that either. If you're buying something, discretion is key, right?
Yeah.
And what's interesting is my father knew that, but he got carried away by the publicity.
Swept up in the whole celebrity part of it, I suppose.
Yes, exactly. And actually that kind of ruined it.
Yeah.
And then also there was the egg's sort of secret flaw, which, him and my mother desperately tried to keep hidden from the world, which was that it didn't quite work. Only a very core group of people knew this.
That's right.
But, I mean, really, if you think about it, right, you've got a massive 18-carat egg. You know, we haven't gone through the vital statistics, but 15 kilograms of 18-carat gold, 24,000 diamonds, 2 foot tall. You know,
2 foot tall.
2 foot tall on its pedestal. So it was about the height of a small child.
You've got like is there a picture of it in the book?
Yes, there are in the middle. There's pictures actually.
Let's have a look. Let's go.
I wanted a
Maybe
plate
you
section.
can show, and we can show everyone.
There's the egg, and there's my dad making the egg.
Oh.
And there's those are my great grandparents. There's Moshe. There's Hannah. There's great grandma Leah.
Wow.
There's Moshe's sister Fanny and her husband, who went on to be part of the Anglo-American banking family.
Wow.
There's Lily, Grandma Lily, Grandpa Joe, and a very young Paul, my father. And you can see the similarity visually between him and Lily.
Yeah.
And also the fact that my dad was quite tall, the tallest in the family, you know. There he is again. And he definitely inherited his sense of style and his eye for design from his mother. She had fantastic style. And maybe from his father, actually. There's Joe in the shop. That was me being born.
Oh, look, there you are.
There are my parents and their kind of 80s power couple best.
Love
Some
that.
Glamorous charity. Those are Mum's red sequin shoes. And we used to say...
She is so glamorous, isn't she?
I know.
Scottish lady.
We used to say those were her Wizard of Oz shoes. And as kids, we'd put them on. They were all, because they're the red sequin shoes.
Yeah.
So we'd put them on and walk around in them. There's Grandma Lily, and that was featured in the Bonhams catalogue when their personal jewellery collection was auctioned off after their death by my uncle. That's me and my sister with my dad, my mum and dad again. Prince Charles, when we beat him, gracious in defeat.
That's the polo.
That's the
polo
Kutchinsky
team.
shirts there.
Oh, look at that, guys! And there's the brand name. You can see it. Yep.
There's me getting in on the victory action with the trophy.
Wow.
And this is rather amusing. This is the family in the shop in the early 70s. So there's my dad looking very young. And then we've got, that's his brother. I think that's Stanley, who is Lily's nephew. Grandpa, David Moraine, who was his nephew. And who's on the end? Oh, maybe that's Roger, actually. Oh, yes, that's Solly. Sorry, that's great.
Well, yeah, Solly. So these are all, I mean, I love it that you've put all these pictures in, because these are all, as you know, someone reading a book, you picture characters in your mind's eye.
Yeah.
And like seeing your mum and your Grandpa Joe, it's I because I haven't got to this bit yet, so you know, so
well, I really wanted them to be colour pictures as well. And there was a discussion with
so 80s, isn't it? Look at that, so
Diana,
dynasty,
that's
isn't
Diana.
it? Oh, look! Wow. Do you see that, guys? Diana. The back of her there. Yeah,
Mum meeting Diana. Mum and the Duchess of Norfolk.
Wow.
That was the egg at the V&A.
Wow, look in the V&A.
Its debut. Absolutely rammed. Family shot at Grandpa's 70th birthday. My uncle sort of in the shadows there. You know, that was at the Dorchester, all very grand. And don't want to spoil the end for everyone, but this is the egg in its new home.
Wow.
And me, when I finally met the people that bought it, or the family of. And there, if you see up close, is our name, which is still etched onto the summit of the egg.
Wow.
And I got to kind of run my fingers over that when I finally found it. So that was amazing. So so after the egg, you know, so the egg doesn't sell, everything's going wrong, Dad has an affair, our family gets blown up along with the business. My father's sort of starting this new life. We didn't see him, obviously, anywhere near as much. It was difficult between my parents, understandably.
Yeah.
So my relationship with my dad, I was always really close to him, and I always forgave him. And actually, you know, whereas my sisters had different views, and part of the book was trying to kind of understand that in myself, you know, like, why did I always just have it very clear in my mind that kind of whatever he did, you know, he'd always be my dad and I'd always love him. You know, maybe I should have been angrier about some things, you know, but I wasn't. And again, like, you know, I should have hated the egg, but I didn't. You know, instead I just kind of, and as you know, as with him, with his obsession with the egg, when I started looking for it, I realised when I got close that what I'd done was obviously invest my father into the egg.
Yes.
You know, so I had this very surreal conversation with these private investigators who eventually helped me, gave me the clue that helped me find it. And they were sort of trying to understand what my mission was all about. You know, they were like, do you have a claim? And I was like, no. And they were like, well, do you want to buy it? And I was like, obviously can't afford it.
No.
I just wanted to see it. And as I was sort of trying to explain to them, you know, that I'd lost my father when I was 11 when he left, and then I lost him again when I was 20 when he died.
Yeah.
And then this is sort of, you know, the only part of him I have left. And you realise you're kind of imbued this inanimate object with, you know, human spirit. But, you know, we all do our things for our own kind of slightly crazy, you know, wild reasons. Anyway, so they seemed to understand. They were very nice, the investigators. But it took a long time to kind of deal with the emotions involved. I spent time researching the history and the creation and all of that. And then eventually I spoke to a friend and I was like, you know, do you think I can write the book without finding the egg? You know, and could I put this story together? Could I restore Dad's legacy? You know, because obviously I wanted to find the egg, but what I really wanted was for the world to know about it and for his place in the canon of British craftsmanship to be, and the name of Kutchinsky to kind of regain its, you know, status, so to speak. So that was what I wanted to achieve. And my friend was like, no, because there's no ending. You know, and I was like, oh yeah, you're right, aren't you? Yeah, got to fight. You know,
you've got to find
got to find the egg for the mission to be complete. So, you know, and then I remember being told by a family friend who used to work for my parents that it would be like looking for a golden needle in a haystack, you know, and everyone was quite negative about it. But I was like, okay, well, where there's you know, I'm a journalist, so I know that if you just stay on a story and keep asking questions, eventually someone gives you a lead that leads you somewhere. And, you know, that is what happened eventually after a decade of dead ends. And
so it took you a decade to find it?
It did, yeah. Yeah.
Serena,
I got Argyle, you know, they took the egg and eventually sold it. So they knew who they'd sold it to.
Yeah.
But they would, obviously, for totally understandable reasons, they wouldn't tell me for client confidentiality. But what I'd asked them was, would you, if I wrote a letter explaining my slightly eccentric mission, would you pass it to the owner? And I don't know, there wasn't anyone. I think they're a big company. No one knew exactly how to handle my request. You know, they were very, very helpful in lots of other ways. Robin, you know, shout out to Robin from Argyle, because she was amazing over the years. But they could not help me with this bit. They did put me in touch with someone who had left Argyle, who'd sort of become the egg's guardian when they took it back.
Wow.
And he'd kind of overseen it. And he said, look, I will ask a contact. Maybe we can do the letter thing, you know, maybe. And I was like, okay, you know, can't give you a name for all these reasons, but maybe, you know, I know someone who knows someone. And I was like, okay. So I wrote the letter, had it all ready to go, translated it into Japanese, because it was in Japan. And then was told...
No, this has not been simple, has it, finding the egg?
No.
Wow. Oh.
And then was told that, you know, the person who'd bought it had passed away. Now, that was kind of, you know, 2022, and I was getting really close. But in the intervening years, so all I'd been told by Argyle was that it'd gone to Japan and it was sitting in a faux French chateau somewhere outside Tokyo, which is great. But obviously I looked and looked and looked, couldn't find any clues, couldn't find any trace of this faux French chateau, nothing. And I was like, maybe, you know, I didn't think they were lying to me, but I thought, you know, is it even still there? And then I spoke to lots of other people in the trade, and I was told various things. I was told that the pink diamonds were so valuable that they had been taken out, it had been melted down, didn't exist anymore, it was gone. Which when I was told that, I burst into tears.
Yeah, I was going to say, oh my God, after everything that you've put in. Yeah.
I was devastated.
Oh, Serena.
I was surprised by how devastated I was, but it was sort of what I was saying earlier about the fact that I'd obviously invested so emotionally in this object. And the idea that it was gone was like losing my dad again.
Yeah.
And then I was also told that it was locked up in a warehouse somewhere and it would take it apart because no one could fix it. You know, I was told that it might have been bought by, you know, it was in Japan, maybe it was bought by a Yakuza. I mean, loads of wild rumours were flying. Didn't know what to think. But obviously, just tried to interrogate each one. And every step of the way, the fact that it could have been melted down was a very real possibility. And then once the Argyle diamond mine ran out of diamonds between 2020 and 2022, everyone I spoke to was like, we'd be very surprised if it's still intact, because those diamonds
I just would have automatically thought that, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Being in the jewellery trade, knowing what I know about things, I that's what I would have expected.
Absolutely. And then, when I finally met the people that had bought the egg, they are Japanese, and they talked about this thing called goen, which is a connection, a karmic form of connection between people, and it can sometimes involve objects. And
I believe in that, absolutely, 100%. I talk about things like that. I didn't know it was called goen, but yeah.
And the objects kind of bring you together. So I'd sort of reached a point, lots of life happened along the way while I was looking for the egg. I met my husband. He nearly died in a car crash.
Serena.
He survived. We had 2 kids. We got married.
Yeah.
Lots of life happened.
Yeah.
But the egg mission was always there. Occasionally tried to forget about it, but it would always come back. And I got made redundant in 2022. And I was like, okay, my kids, I've had the kids now. I've been gifted a few months where I've got a bit of a buffer, and I can really have a go at this.
Yeah.
So I did, and I was like, right, now or never. And just at that moment, this egg, it turned out, had been bought by these Japanese billionaires. It had been in a sort of, the faux French chateau was sort of almost right. It was a guest house that was modelled on Versailles.
Wow.
So the egg was in this guest house within a Japanese mansion. And it was, but it was locked away.
Yeah.
They were a very private family. They'd had a terrible tragedy occur just as they bought the egg. I mean, you could say Kutchinsky's egg is cursed.
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, you could definitely say it's cursed.
Yeah.
Terrible tragedy befell the family, and therefore they wanted their privacy. And I obviously respect that. But, and then it turned out while in the decade that I'd been looking for the egg, they'd been trying to sell it. In fact, they'd heard about the article that I wrote, and it gave them the idea that maybe I would want to buy it.
God.
I know. And I think they quickly realised that wasn't a possibility. They did try to sell it to the British royal family, though. They did call up Buckingham Palace.
Did they? Because it's sort of English heritage and everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're incredibly, they move in those sort of circles. I mean, they're billionaires. So then they had sort of... Princess Christina from Luxembourg nearly bought it, until she realised that actually you have to pay customs tax on things that aren't over 100 years old, which it's not. And so there were a few sort of false starts for them as well. And they didn't know what to do with it. And inheritance tax in Japan is absolutely colossal, 50%.
50%?
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
So they'd been hit by it when his father, it was Chairman Mabuchi that bought it. And his son, Takashi, and his wife, Reiko, had inherited it. So they got stung really badly by the inheritance tax, and they didn't want the same thing to befall their kids. So they were basically trying to get rid of it, trying to offload it.
Yeah.
And they couldn't find anyone to buy it. And then she said one morning she woke up and she had a vision, and she said, we're going to donate it to the nation. So they gave it to a museum.
Crikey.
And the timing of that was bizarre, because it was in June 2022 that they decided to donate it, just as I was thinking, right, this is it. I'm going, now.
So that's fairly recent that it was donated. Yeah.
And if it had stayed in private collection, I wouldn't ever have got to seen it.
No.
There's just no way, with the language barriers, the cultural differences, the fact that this family guarded their privacy very understandably. And even if they'd sold it to Princess Christina or whoever, it had gone to another private collection of another incredibly wealthy family.
Yeah.
And again, very unlikely I would have ever seen it. So the fact that it was going to be on public display in an actual museum was just, when I finally found this out, so that, I was still trying, I'd had the news that I'd got really close. I was going to, I knew that it was in Japan. We were going to get they were going to pass the letter. They came back and they said, oh no, the person that bought it originally had died, which we now know. And then that was a dead end. Someone else who was this kind of Indian diamond dealer living in Dubai, he told me that he'd seen it and he could take me there, but that turned out to be BS. But I was kept, I kept having dead ends, but it was the more dead ends than I'd had for a while. You just got to keep going. So eventually everyone just said, I called up this art detective in London, Chris Marinello, who's amazing, finds like stolen Nazi paintings and stuff.
Fascinating.
And he was really interesting. He was like, look, I can't, your case is not quite of my books because what you're looking for wasn't stolen. He said, but I can contact you with a few people and I can give you some tips. And then he said, Kroll will find it for you.
I remember that name,
Yeah. And then another family friend had also told me this. But the problem with Kroll is that they're international investigators, but they cost a pretty penny.
Yeah.
But basically I decided I was just going to try and blag it. Sorry, Kroll. And I emailed them. Well, I just thought, blag it's not quite the right word.
No.
But I thought if I go to Kroll and say, look, I've got this quite eccentric quest, could you help me? Maybe they would, maybe it would engage them. Maybe they'd like the story. Maybe they'd like to be featured in the book, which they are. Anyway, so I had a meeting with them, and then they, I sent over some bits and bobs, some information. They were like, "Oh, we'll come back to you." And then time sort of slipped away. And then eventually I got back in touch and was like, "Oh, have you found anything out?" And I got this email just before Christmas. In 2022, and it said that was when I found out the egg was going on display, and I just couldn't believe it. It was like a Christmas miracle,
I felt like it's almost like something intervened to make that happen. It's pretty incredible.
It was bizarre, and it turned out. So then when I finally, I did ignore the 16.5 grand quote that came with it. Like, oh, okay, we'll just deal with that once I've found the egg. It'll all be fine. Don't tell the husband.
There's your father's daughter.
Well, yes,
Serena.
I think so. Yes. Yeah. So then I set up a meeting with them, and by the time we got to the meeting, I was like, "Oh, what am I going to do? I can't afford £16,500. I had a redundancy pay. Obviously, I had a little bit of money, but nowhere near that. But anyway, I didn't need it because when we got on the call, the head of their Singapore office, Tad, he said, "Oh, my friend." A friend of a friend brokered the sale. He said, I just happened to be...
You must have gone, gee.
He's actually said to me, this doesn't happen. Like, the quote we gave you was for all the scoping work we would do, and we would have found it, but we don't need to do that because actually I just mentioned it to a mate, and then he said, oh, I know the guy. And it just happened like that. So, it sounds like got a lucky break, but obviously a lucky break after.
Yeah, all that.
You make your own luck, I think.
One thing is, I feel like this whole journey, you must have been quite emotionally exhausted by the end of it. I'm skipping here, but when you actually saw the egg, when you got to go there and see it, how was that? Explain that.
So I was in Tokyo. I'd gone to Tokyo for like 10 days. I had caught up with some old university friends, which was very nice. But it was quite a strange experience. I wasn't with my husband, I wasn't with my children, I wasn't with my mum or my sisters. It's like on my own on this like strange solo mission. And the egg is in the Museum of Nature and Science in Japan. Don't want to give too many spoilers, but it's quite an incongruous setting. Maybe we'll just say it as so where the egg is, the museum it's in, it's quite incongruous. It's not where you'd imagine it. When you're making your way to where it was on show, you have to go past a dinosaur and a meteorite, and then this massive glass case of taxidermy animals, which I found quite terrifying. So it's sort of in with all these, I was like, why is it here? This is strange. It's not the glamorous setting that I'm used to.
So it wasn't quite a fairy tale, as that's a way to ending that you thought when you came and actually it was beholden in front of you.
It was in this sort of like clinical conference style room with like a checkerboard floor and, where they literally have like conferences in the museum, sort of metal chairs. And yes, it all felt, and they had these like ropes in front of the case, but obviously the room was empty because it was a Monday and the museum was shut. So they very kindly allowed me to come on the Monday. I think I was anxious that I wouldn't feel anything. Or that it would feel conflicting. But when I saw our name carved on the summit, and realised that the egg has outlived my dad and will outlive me.
Incredible story.
That was amazing. And then the Mabuchis who bought it was so lovely, and we all went for drinks afterwards and shared our stories of it.
Wow.
And it turned out they'd fixed it. The egg's terrible flaw. So when I saw, that was the other thing I was anxious about, that actually it still wouldn't work properly. But they put it, they put it on display and they turned it on and it all worked amazingly. And it turned out that Mr. Mabuchi, who was the son of the man that bought it, he'd actually taken the whole thing apart, the whole thing. They'd paid 800 billion yen for it, 800 million yen, I think. And he said, it was our responsibility. If I hadn't paid all the money for it, I wouldn't have taken it apart.
So is he a clockmaker? Has he got...
No, they made their fortune by making teeny tiny motors.
And that was the interest behind buying the egg, was it?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think Chairman Mabuchi just apparently wanted to have something there was only one of in the world.
Well, there you go. I mean,
so the motors. So I thought when I first read about them, found out about them, I assumed that they had, maybe Argyle had asked them to fix the motor or something, and that's how it happened. No, they didn't know about the motor not working. Right. So when they got it into the guest house, and then it failed fairly quickly. But they obviously, these people are like world-class engineers.
Yeah.
Which I have to say, my father, wasn't. So they took it to pieces. They put a Japanese motor in. And now it works perfectly for the first time. So when I saw it, and my dad, obviously he wanted to sell it, but really what he wanted was for it to be in a museum.
Yeah. So it has, this story, it did finish in a way that if your dad could see now, he would be happy where it is. And I think so anyone can go and see it now, can they, Serena?
Well, it was only on display briefly, basically. So as ever with the egg, things are complicated by the fact that it cost an awful lot to insure it. So
yes, of course.
Yeah, so they basically had to lock it away again until they raised the money to put it on public display. So they've told me, well, it was 5 years in 2023. So where are we now? 2026. So 10 years. In fact, they said they're open to donations. So, And
do you think they will ever sell it? Because I think your book is going to highlight it more. And I think there'll be people that want this incredible one-off unique egg that's now very famous.
Well, fingers crossed. But actually what I would love is for it to come back to Britain.
Yes, I think so.
I'd love for it to go on show at the V&A.
Yeah.
Again.
Oh, that would be amazing, wouldn't it?
That would be the homecoming, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And I'd love to take my kids to see it.
Yes.
They've heard so much about it.
Grandad Paul's famous egg.
Exactly. Yeah, they were at the book launch, and it means a lot to me that they know that heritage. Basically.
Wow, the book launch I saw on your Instagram. It really looked fun, and lots of people there.
It was a lot of fun. Yeah. Well, I've been working on it a long time, so lots of people have heard about it. But my youngest, actually, his best friend at school just gave him a jewel, and called it a Kutchinsky jewel.
Oh.
So there you go.
Well, I really want to congratulate you, Serena, just on such a fantastic book. And as I said at the start when we were chatting, whether some of my followers are, jewellery fanatics, and other people, I think, just like my crazy personality. But it really is a page turner. And I'm a pretty slow reader, and I've already, I think, in 2 days read nearly half the book. And I cannot wait to go back to bed tonight. I've got a little light, one of these light torches to read at night. It's brilliant. And I find it very therapeutic and really, and I'm not just saying that, and sort of bigging you up, because I think it really is an incredible story. And I feel, what's the next book coming?
Well,
can you say anything?
I can't reveal. I do have an idea. I need to talk to some people about it. It would also be non-fiction. I basically want to tell the story of the other great loss of my life, which was my best friend, Francesca Lowe, who was a brilliant artist.
Francesca Lowe, yes.
The most famous British artist you may not have heard of.
Yeah.
And she died tragically far too young, and her work has kind of dropped off the radar. So I have
heard of her. I don't know, when you said it, I have heard of her and I can picture her, but yeah. So she was an artist, just as in a painter, was she?
She was a painter, and there was, a lot of mystery in her paintings, and I would like to understand more about who she was, by decoding her work, but she died tragically when she was 37.
Oh my goodness.
Whilst pregnant with her second child.
So a tragedy, an absolute tragedy.
Yes, exactly. And, you know, she suffered a lot with being a woman in the art world as well.
Yeah.
You know, there was a lot of discrimination. She felt. She wrote a piece for me under a pseudonym about it.
Did she?
She did, because Tracy Enon said that quote, which is that only the best artists who have children, the only good artists who have children are men. And Fran certainly found it very challenging. Anyway, there's lots there, but
so
yes.
That's just food for thought for future
and I'd also love to do some art books with jewellery. Actually, I've got a few ideas in that vein. You know, something around the British modernists. You know, they really inspire me. Andrew Greener, David Morris. You know, it was such, and Joe Kutchinsky, such a fascinating period. I'd also like to do a bit more in objet d'art and that whole period. You know, these kind of extraordinary creations.
Yeah.
So yes, I think, you know, there will be. I'd also maybe like to do something with, you know, with the name in the jewellery space.
I think so. I mean, I've had quite a lot of Kutchinsky jewellery, and it always sells very quickly. I feel like it's exciting, Serena, and there's more to come from you.
I think, I hope so. Watch this space. In fact, we could look at my my ring that my mum gave me when I got engaged. So you can
beautiful emerald.
My dad made it for her, so it's not Hallmark because it was a gift.
So your dad made this?
Yeah. The diamonds are obviously heart-shaped.
Yeah.
And
look at the heart shape.
I always have my Grandma Lily's words in my head, which is the safest place for jewellery is on you. Yeah, I do love it. You know, occasionally when, you know, I'm like, do I want to get a kitchen renovation or do I want to keep? But I don't think I could ever sell it.
But I agree with your grandma, because I always say to people with jewellery, you know, if you buy it, wear it, because over the years we have sold lots of jewellery to people and they've said, oh, I bought that from you and it's still in the box. I bought it from, I never wear it. And I think, that is crazy. The jewellery should be worn and you know, admired and appreciated.
That's how jewels get their stories.
Yeah, definitely. Well, guys, we're going to wrap this up now. I mean, I can't say this lovely lady. I really feel like I've made a connection with you, and I've loved reading the book, and I've loved meeting you, and I feel like. Now, I don't know, but definitely there's more to come.
Absolutely.
From you. And I think, it's very, very exciting. And thank you, Serena.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me in the Friar House. I love it.
Yeah. So, it's goodbye from Victoria and goodbye from Serena. Bye, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed the video.
Bye. Thanks.